Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's time for another edition of Talk Back. We appreciate you listening. This is episode 213. That's right, 213 of season 2. Justin, our episode last week was pretty popular. I think the NFL football is drawing a lot of people in, so we're going to continue right on schedule with our divisional previews in the NFL for the AFC South and the AFC West. So I know you've, as the director of content, you've prepared all of these questions and all of the lines for Vegas that we're looking at. You've got a lot to talk about. So this week in our episode, in segment 1, we'll hit up the AFC South, talk about a lot of those teams that we mentioned last week could be thorns in the side of those teams out of the AFC East and the AFC North. Then in segment 2, we'll swing it over to the AFC West. Justin, I know you're heavy on that division since your Denver Broncos are part of that. And then right at the end of the show, we'll talk about the major talk-worthy event of the week, which was the fact that in NASCAR, one of the top 3 drivers could be without a car next year, just depending on how things go with funding and sponsorship. So before we roll out the end of the show, we definitely need to talk about that. So when we get back, we'll hit up the AFC South. Is it going to be Jacksonville, Tennessee, potentially Deshaun Watson returning for the Houston Texans, or maybe it's Andrew Luck for the Colts that's going to make the difference? All of that and more on this episode of Talk Back.
Welcome back to part 2 of our NFL preview series. Last week, if you followed the show, we talked about the AFC East. We talked about the AFC North. In a similar fashion to what we did last year that our listeners really seem to enjoy, we took the Vegas over-under win totals, and we went through them for each team. We also answered one big question, as Eric alluded to there in the opener. Last week, pretty popular episode, so we're going to keep it rolling this week, and we're going to jump right into the AFC South. We teased it a little bit last week, but this is a division that has a lot of depth in it. There is a lot of good teams in this division. You can make a case that all 4 teams could potentially have a chance to make a run at a potential playoff position. So let's kick it off with the team that Vegas actually thinks won't be in the playoff mix, but they are getting one of their key players back, and that is the Indianapolis Colts. They are coming off of a 4-12 season in 2017. Major reason for that was they didn't have Andrew Luck. He was out for 2017. He is back this year. Has looked a bit shaky in the preseason in his first start just this week on Monday Night Football. But again, that's just his first start. It's preseason. So, Eric, I think the big question coming out for the Indianapolis Colts is Andrew Luck was a quarterback his first 3 years. I think people forget 2012, 2013, 2014. This guy went 11-5 for 3 straight years with teams that weren't that great. Then all of a sudden, over his next 22 games, just 10 wins, 10-12. So, Eric, in 2018, which Andrew Luck are we going to see? The quarterback that had 3 straight 11-5 seasons, or the quarterback that's been under 500 in his last 22 starts?
That's going to be a tough question to answer until we see him really perform at full speed in a full game in regular season. So I know that he's been looking okay in some of the practices, although I wasn't too impressed with some of the preseason numbers. He's already throwing interceptions, which listeners to our show know that I'm not very high on Andrew Luck. I think he's quite overrated, but I also recognize the fact that he hasn't always had the protection behind the line that would be required in the NFL to have more time and more decision making. But again, coming out of Stanford with all of the praise that was heaped on him, I really was expecting more early on in his career. Now we're starting to see a guy who's breaking down a little bit, had a significant neck injury that he's had a really tough time coming back from. So Justin, I don't know how to answer that question for sure until I get a couple of weeks under my belt and see how things are going on the field. I think if he's game ready, he makes a difference. I mean, he's certainly one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league if he's playing at full strength, but he has to get better at throwing early game interceptions. If that trend continues, you'll continue to see the Andrew Luck of old, which is that they're always playing from behind in the third and fourth quarter. You hear about 4 to 5 times a year, these amazing comebacks, which I think are really, like I said, overrated because he's part of the reason that they're in the hole to begin with in those games. But if there's not enough support around him, whether it's on the offensive line, whether it's defensively to keep the team in games, you're going to see them struggle again to get to that 11-5 mark. And I think that's why you see Vegas not really sure what direction to go with the Indianapolis Colts in 2018. So Justin, I'm not sold. I really can't answer that for sure. I am hesitant, though, to get on the bandwagon and get too terribly excited until I see what Andrew Luck we're going to get. I'm not willing to commit.
I don't think we're going to get the 11-5 Andrew Luck yet. Look, this guy's worth 4 to 5 wins a year. I think that's pretty safe to say just for what he brings to this team. What scares me, Eric, is when you look at the weapons around him. Outside T.Y. Hilton, there's not a lot around him. Jack Doyle may literally be the next most recognizable name, and that's going to be for people strictly that play fantasy football that were in desperate need of a tight end last year. And Jack Doyle was a guy that a lot of people were able to pick up and add as the season went on. Eric Ebron, he's a guy that Detroit didn't want back. Ryan Grant, he was a fourth option in Washington. Now he's their number 2 wide receiver. Look at their running backs. They're going to start with Marlon Mack. Just a lot of questions about what is around Andrew Luck. And even on Monday night, Terrell Suggs got around and put a pretty good hit on Andrew Luck. And the biggest problem for this Colts team was they never put a good offensive line around Andrew Luck, and they forced him into taking way too many hits. Now, he doesn't help it by holding the football, trying to extend plays, trying to make plays, taking big shots that he needs to try to avoid. But the offensive line play and the play of the weapons around Andrew Luck, I think, is going to make the bigger difference on this team. But you're right. Andrew Luck has to clean up some of the turnovers. Again, that game on Monday night in one of the drives he had a bad interception in the red zone, just mistakes that you can't make, and you can't make it on a team that's starved for talent. So I know there's a lot of teams that passed on Dez Bryant. This is a team, Eric, that I'm surprised that didn't try to go out and get themselves a possession receiver. You have a guy that can take the top off the defense in T.Y. Hilton. I'm not sure why they didn't go out and try to make a play for a guy like Dez Bryant. They lost Dante Moncrief. He went to Jacksonville in their own division. You start looking up and down their roster at their depth at wide receiver, there's not a lot there. So that really scares me. And I think that's part of the reason why, because of the weapon issue and because you just don't know what you're getting with Andrew Luck, why Vegas, Eric, has set the line at 6.5. Looking at that number, what do you like? Over or under 6.5 wins for the Indianapolis Colts this year?
I'm pretty impressed with that number by Vegas because as I look down through their schedule, I think that's a fair number because I'm not sold on the over and I'm not quite sold on the under either. But as we'll get down through this AFC division that we're previewing right now in the South, one of their big challenges is that they've got games against the NFC East, and I think that'll be a tough road that they're going to have to forge through on that. The other thing is that they've got the AFC East, which we said last week is actually going to benefit this AFC South division in the fact that they get the Jets and the Bills and the Dolphins and potentially some opportunities to win. Like we said, we thought that was going to be a downside for the East. I think it's an upside for a team like the Colts. But then you look at their other games, they're at Oakland. I think that's going to be a tough fight in that AFC West battle there. And then, you're looking at their interdivision games, Houston, Tennessee, Jacksonville. We're going to go down through that in here in a minute. But Justin, I think they have a really good shot to win their home opener on September 9th against the Bengals. We talked about how bad I thought the Bengals were going to be. I think they win their home opener, get off to a good start at 1-0. That might get the feels going, but then they've got to go to Washington. They've got to go to Philly. Then they've got the Texans and the Patriots in the next 4 weeks. Look, I'm not going to read down through their schedule for you, but I think you can realistically say there's a chance, they could open the season at 1-5, 2-4. So I'm having a tough time getting to 7 at the over. So I'm going to say push or under.
Yeah, 6.5 is definitely a fair number. I'm going to go with the over. I think they'll be 7-9. I said there in my piece talking about the question, I felt Andrew Luck was worth 4 or 5 wins. If you think about the fact that they figured out a way to win 4 games last year with really not a lot at the quarterback position, I think they can find a way to scratch out 7. I think they'll obviously lose to the Patriots if they're all healthy and Brady's on the field, but I think they have a chance to win the next 3 versus that division. I think they can win 2 in their own. I think they can beat a team like the Bengals. Then it's just going to be a team like, can they jump up and knock off the Giants or Redskins or Cowboys, one of those teams there in the NFC East. So I think they find their way to 7. I don't see them getting back into the playoffs this year. I think they're probably a year away. Luck's going to have rust early in the season. Then I think he'll pick up the pace as it goes on, but I just see them falling just short of the playoffs, but I think they'll be over 6.5. So I'm going to take the over. Let's see what we think here on the next team Vegas has. Kind of surprising. This team was in the playoffs last year, found a way to go on the road to Kansas City and win a wild card game on wild card weekend. That's the Tennessee Titans. They snuck into the playoffs last year at 9-7. This year they go out. They're pretty active on the free agent market. They get 2 Patriots, Dion Lewis and Malcolm Butler, and they also make a change at the coaching position, getting rid of Mike Mularkey, firing him, and then bringing in Mike Vrabel. So, Eric, this was a team. They've been progressing along the path. They got into the playoffs. Mariota was hurt a lot of last year. He got to the point he wasn't even running. He wouldn't leave the pocket because of fighting that knee injury that he had until he could get healthy. And then you saw him start to look better late in the season and when they got into the playoffs. But they make the change at the coaching position. They go younger. They get rid of Mike Mularkey coming off of that playoff victory. So, Eric, ultimately, do you like the move of making the coaching change, or do you feel like they should have added these other pieces that they needed and stuck it out with Mike Mularkey and see if they could build upon what they did in 2017?
I think it's a fair question, because anytime you have a coach who wins a playoff game and then is shown the door, you kind of wonder what was the catalyst of that. And so I have to believe that it was a good move for the Titans as an organization. There must have been something going on in the background that the team felt like, maybe even the GM felt like there just had to be a move, even though they had a little bit of momentum through the season, getting into the playoffs and then getting that win over what we felt was a Kansas City team that was sort of limping in at that point.
Eric, do you feel that they were happy with Mariota's progression, or do you feel like they think as an organization he's not where he should be?
Tough to say. I think this is a year where they're going to measure that for sure. I mean, anytime you have a quarterback coming out of the draft that's, again, a prospect that everyone's looking forward to, there's going to be a certain expectation there. Maybe Mularkey had a different expectation than others did, and they didn't see eye to eye on that. And of course, as we've talked about many times, as your star player or the coach, if it's coming down to the two of them, sometimes the move is just going to be to get rid of the coach and go in a different direction. But something tells me the fact that they've made some aggressive moves, getting Dion Lewis, getting Malcolm Butler, others, a draft that seemed very, aggressive in terms of how they were going to approach their game style this year. Then you, of course, have Mariota, hoping that he's healthy and productive. You see a team where maybe a coaching change was necessary and there's things going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about. I have to give them the benefit of the doubt there. But what I like about this team is that they did go out and make some of these moves. I had to laugh. A picture I saw of Dion Lewis standing next to Derrick Henry, it really looks like a horse jockey standing next to an NBA player or something, because the size difference and difference of height is so extreme. But clearly, they have something in mind that they're going to use for a two-headed monster, and they've got a plan there. And I like that. I like a coach who wants to come in, kind of turn things around, talk to the GM, say, hey, we're going to try some new things. We're going to draft these guys. We're going to bring in Malcolm Butler, who probably has a chip on his shoulder and will go out and play great defense for us because he's really ticked off about how things happened in New England. I like what they're doing, and I have to believe in it until they show me otherwise. So no issues on my end with the coaching change, although, like I said, it's a little odd to win a playoff game and then have a coach be dismissed.
It really seemed like Tennessee ownership thought that they were not going to be able to go into Kansas City and win, and they already had it made up in their mind that they were going to make a change. And especially when they fell behind early in that game, it's like at halftime they were thinking, you know what, we're done with Malarkey.